Joining me on our news panel, Howard Mintz, reporter with the San Jose Mercury News, and Tom Abate, staff writer with the San Francisco Chronicle, and Nanette Asimov, San Francisco Chronicle education writer. Nanette, let me ask you first of all, were these disruptions on the campuses, over cuts and other things that the students are unhappy about, were they really very disruptive?
Well, it really depends on what campus you're talking about. This week at San Francisco State University, things were pretty disruptive. Thousands of students were displaced from business classes, and they were quite angry about it. And on the UC Berkeley campus, though, they seem to have learned a lesson that they learned from, I would say, about a month ago when they were disrupting classes and pulling fire alarms and running around the campus, and they angered their fellow students, just as just happened at San Francisco State. So what you saw this week was a takeover of Wheeler Auditorium, where the students took pride in not disrupting other students, but opening what they called open university and inviting everybody in, and they were having workshops and lectures on the state's budget crisis, which is the reason for these demonstrations in the first place. So nevertheless, today, 66 of those students were arrested, and the reason was that tomorrow finals are scheduled in Wheeler Auditorium at Berkeley, and so the university was perhaps rightly afraid that tomorrow's finals would be disruptive there, because a party was scheduled tonight and it was supposed to continue all evening. So they went in and arrested 66 demonstrators, and yesterday 25 were arrested at San Francisco State.
What about the community colleges? They've been quiet, or are they quiet so far but getting
Well, they haven't
noisier?
taken over buildings yet, so maybe that remains to be seen. But they are very angry on the community college campuses as well, and you see demonstrations there too, just no building takeovers. And earlier this week, Jack Scott, the chancellor of the community colleges, joined Chancellor Reed with CSU and Mark Yudof at UC to talk to a joint committee up there, and talked about the importance of more money for higher education in California.
It seems like it would need to reach a critical mass across the state for these demonstrations to have any effect. Is anybody listening, and is there any sense that things can intensify to a level that it actually might make a difference as opposed to scattered
It's
activity?
a great question. I've attended so many of these demonstrations now, from UCLA to Berkeley. I was beginning to think somebody really was listening, and then I was talking to a few people up in Sacramento, and they said, we're sympathetic, but what's it going to do? The state has a $21 billion budget deficit at this time, and they're just about to start the budget negotiations. The season is about to begin, but everybody needs more money. And so, as sympathetic as the students' argument is, higher education is supposed to be free, but there's no money.
Well, we should go back to say what has happened already in terms of pronouncements, at least at the UC system, about an increase in fees and what this could mean in terms of some students maybe not being able to afford to attend a university at all.
Right. Well, 32% fee increase was approved last month by the UC Regents, and a similar one at the CSU campus. But at UC, if you are a student whose family makes $70,000 or less, and this is a surprise to a lot of students who aren't aware of this, they don't pay a tuition. So the tuition next year is supposed to climb, I'm going to say, over $11,000 when you include all the peripheral fees. This is in an education that was supposed to be free, according to the master plan. But so middle-class students are really the ones who are going to suffer these fee increases the most, because they're not thoroughly eligible for free tuition the way the lower income students are.
It's amazing. Just the sweep. I came to California in the mid-1970s from another state as a serviceman. I went to UC almost for free. I was talking about it with my friends. And now it's $11,000 and $11,000 for room and board. That's right. Suddenly the question of whether or not the state is accessible for higher education becomes real. What are we going to do? Yeah,
well, that brings up the master plan, and we're almost out of time, and so we really ought to say what the dream was.
Well, the dream
maybe still
was,
is.
and still is, because
Yeah.
it's still on the books.
Yes, of course.
50 years ago, the master plan said a largely free education, free of tuition. Peripheral fees will be charged, but this is what everybody will get in California. And the master plan divided the community colleges, California State University and UC, and it said, you know, they will be world-class universities, and lo and behold, they really are. And that is what the executives fear now could undermine that dream of continuing excellence at public universities in California.
So the students are speaking to the long-term dream.
They are.
And what the system is up against is this huge deficit that is to continue into the future.
That's correct.
Which means you get to come back here again, I'm sure.
I'm sure that's true.
Okay. Well, the future for the state as a whole, and it now is forecast by UCLA's Anderson forecast, which they do each year, and it's a pretty credible forecast. And it didn't seem to have very much good news in it, Tom, for us.
No, I'm afraid not. I'm going to talk about 3 different letters that are going to dictate the future of the state next year. We're not quite sure which one will come to be. A V, sharp down and sharp up. That would be the best outcome for the state, but I don't think that that will happen. A U, little square U at the bottom, which went sharply down, we all know, tagging along at a low pace, and then coming back up at some future date in a couple of years is perhaps the best we can hope for. And the one we're really afraid of is W. Down, up a little bit, down again, and back up at some point in the future. We really don't know which of those 3 scenarios is going to play out. Meanwhile, what we have in every indication is how hard pressed the families of California are in dealing with this. We had a report out from the United Way of the Bay Area looking at a new way of measuring the ability to survive, self-sufficiency index, not a poverty index, but really what does it cost for families of different sizes to live in the different locales. Maybe as many as 1 out of 5 families really are having a hard time getting by. And we have so many different problems. For instance, we have the huge NUMMI factory set to close, arguments about their severance, and a big argument, big decision, before the federal government underway about whether or not, in addition to the 4,700 to 5,000 people who are inside the factory who will get some very generous severance from the federal government, whether another 15 to 20,000 supply workers will eventually be affected, including some of those truckers, for instance, at the Port of Oakland, which is a great big part of feeding supplies into the factory, whether their potential unemployment will be covered by the same sort of subsidies.
That's the thing I wonder about these economic forecasts. I mean, what are we looking at in terms of employment? That seems to be the thing people care about the most. You hear all these numbers get thrown at you that, you know, it's leveled off. Maybe it's the number of jobless has dropped, you know, each month, but it's still more people losing their jobs. I mean, how do you square these forecasts, these, you know, grand big picture scenarios with what the numbers are going to look like for jobs?
Well, we don't really have this is called the dismal science, and I think it's only half correct. Dismal being the part that's correct, science being less predictive than one would like. But there have been 10, this is the 11th recession since World War II. 8 of them took the quick V. The last 2 had more of the U shape. There was not a strong recovery of either jobs or economic output. So the question is there a new normal for economic recoveries? And we'll see. I certainly can't predict.
Won't this Anderson report tell us which are we more likely to see? I mean, is there any hope on the horizon?
Well, there's something, perhaps the problem of knowing a little too much about some of these subjects is you read the whole report, 110 pages, and you find phrases like their own regret about not having called the severity of the downturn, which is a big oops, and saying things like, with tongue-in-cheek economic humor, often wrong, but never in doubt. So
they're not great predictors.
What are the things California is losing that will cause this a continued slip until a couple of years out? I mean, is it certain industries?
Well, I think Nanette hit the nail on the head in the whole segment about education. It's a 21st century knowledge economy. We're competing with India. We're competing with China. We're competing with Ireland. Ireland, for instance, has built itself into a modern economic miracle with free education. We're forgetting what we taught the rest of the world, and we're making access to education harder for Californians. That's brain dead.
Are there some segments that will not recover even in the best of times, do you think?
Holly, this is such a varied economy. This is a huge economy. It has everything from nuts to, computer chips. I think that many parts of the economy will come back. I particularly believe and hope that manufacturing comes back. If it doesn't, things, not necessarily NUMMI, but we have Tesla growing up in the southern part of the state. So where something dies, something comes back for California, and I'm hopeful that much of it will.
When? I mean, you have three scenarios, bad, worse, maybe a little better.
And it seems
so
like
when?
money's not flowing.
Right.
I mean, in the sense that was one of the whole ideas behind stimulus, right? Is we're going to get money flowing, lending flowing, and you don't see
that.
Yeah, well, that's why the W is to be feared, because right now we're having some sort of a pop here from the Obama stimulus, not necessarily the Bush TARP thing, but the Obama stimulus will work through the rest of 2010, although it was a little bit slow. But at the end of that, will there be sufficient confidence in the private sector or not to keep the thing going? Will it go into a W? Will it go into a U? Will it go back up?
Well, so we've talked about education not having any money. We've talked about the state on downturn. Now we're going to move to something that's close to the hearts of many, and that is we're going to talk about stadiums. So Howard Mintz, who has filed a lawsuit that could further delay a planned stadium for the 49ers down in Santa Clara?
It's a company, Cedar Fair Entertainment, which is the corporate owners of Great America Theme Park. The proposed 49ers stadium in Santa Clara would be built on a parking lot adjacent to Great America. In the end, the lawsuit probably isn't going to make much difference, and it probably won't be the last lawsuit we see over this development or the ballot language or anything else, because that's what happens in these things. But it's an indication of the complexity of pulling this deal off. It's what happened this week, what happened today. The 49ers and a group that they're backing finalized paperwork, got it to Santa Clara City Hall to put an initiative on the June ballot. It's going to be up to the voters of Santa Clara whether they want a stadium deal or not, whether they think it's a good deal or not. Interestingly, the language in the ballot initiative is all about what a great idea it is for taxpayers, and it's an economic boom to the city, selling it as a stimulus idea. So it's not about football, it's about money.
And is that true, though?
The jury's out on that. I mean, these stadium deals around the country are always, numbers fly on both sides about whether in the long run it pumps money into the local economy. Is the mark of a pro football franchise in your city, does that kind of elevate you and pay off financially? There are some public contributions in this project. There's redevelopment money. They're talking about passing a hotel tax on guests in the city, which is one of those that you can kind of, sleight of hand a little bit, in the sense that, the taxpayers don't feel it. It's, the guy from Omaha who came in for the football game.
Wait, you've talked about the lawsuit, you've talked about the ballot measure by the city council, but there's another ballot measure, right?
Well, there is. I mean, these things are never straightforward. The Santa Clara City Council, since earlier this year when they reached kind of this term sheet deal with the 49ers, has been moving on a track to take all the legal steps they need to take to put it on the ballot. Everyone agrees, the 49ers agree, they want a binding vote of the Santa Clara community to see whether they want this stadium. And the City Council had been moving on this track, and as of last Tuesday had ordered the staff to prepare language for the ballot and so forth. And the 49ers in this group stand up and say, well, we're going to put our initiative on the ballot. It's a citizens initiative. And one kind of quick side note is that enables them to avoid a lawsuit over the environmental impact report on the project, at least in the short run. So it was a very clever move. The 49ers have a little money to play with, so they're getting good advice from their lawyers and political consultants.
So with all of this, is this a done deal in terms of the team leaving San Francisco? It sounds like it's for sure.
It's It's not a done deal in the sense, I think if the Santa Clara voters approve this, it's hard to imagine a scenario where the deal falls apart, although again, you can always pull that, thread of yarn and it unravels. But I think if they get the vote, it's pretty clear the team, has a site they like, they've invested a lot of time and money in this, that they'd go. The thing is, stadium votes are never slam dunks. They're never runaways.
Does Silicon Valley have San Francisco envy, do you think?
Well, they've always had it a little bit, but if, the folks who show up at a 49ers game, I know the 49ers probably know this number by heart, but they're not, half of them are they're from Silicon Valley, they're from Marin, they're from the East Bay. You don't have to be a San Francisco resident to go to Candlestick. Mm-hmm. So that's, it's more of an identity thing.
Who's opposing this? Any group organized yet?
Right now, there is a local kind of grassroots group. They've got a website. They're doing all the things you do these days. They're blogging. They're showing up at the city council meeting. They're not showing up in great numbers, but I think they're going to start getting stronger. They'll get some backing. And there's a group, the San Francisco has a Lennar, this development group that's looking at developing Hunters Point. They've included a stadium in that plan. There might be some San Francisco money pumped into the opposition campaign. I would be shocked if there weren't.
They're still fighting to keep the team
here. There's no question there's a very large, powerful group of people who want to keep that team in San Francisco.
Who's in Santa Clara? Who are the electorate?
It's a typical hodgepodge of Silicon Valley residents. You have your engineers, you have, your people who are from other parts of the country, you have your lifelong Santa Clara residents. I mean, Santa Clara has the group that's actually pushing the stadium is a bunch of former city council people and mayors and so forth and Chamber of Commerce types. So it's an eclectic bunch. I mean,
so they have what San Francisco lacks, a community of city leaders who are fighting to get this stadium.
There is probably a little more cohesion than there is at San Francisco City Hall.
Okay, but at least now in June, one way or the other, we'll know.
I think that's going to be a big test.
Well, my thanks to all of you, Howard, Tom, and to Nanette.